Hello friends! I know it's around the holiday season and one of the big things that we all are faced with is leftovers. We've got turkey carcasses and leftover meat, and we've got like leftover veggie scraps, and we don't want that to go to waste. And one of my favorite ways to use leftover turkey is to make turkey broth. So today we're going to be taking our leftover turkey and we're going to be making it into turkey broth. Now, I hope that you all watched our complete from start to finish Thanksgiving meal. That is what this turkey is from. I'll link that in the description below if you didn't. But if you'll notice, this turkey is actually frozen because that was a few weeks ago. And I know a lot of times it seems overwhelming. You just finished the huge Thanksgiving meal and you're exhausted, and the last thing you want is another roasting pan on your counter while all the company is there. Super easy. Stick it in a baggie, stick it in the freezer. You can even stick the leftover veggie pieces in a baggie and put them in the freezer. Then when you have a quiet day and things are calmed down, you can simmer your broth. This is a super easy thing to do, and it's going to make us a ton of delicious and healthy broth. Really, there's no precise recipe for this. You want to take your carcass and you want to put it in your roasting pan, or I use the roasting pan because it's big enough for the whole chicken. If you don't have a roasting pan like this, and I'll link this down below, if you don't have a roasting pan like this, it is so okay to chop it up into pieces and to do several batches on the stove. It'll work the same way. It'll just take you a little longer. So I'm gonna take my extra chicken pieces, and I'm even gonna put my dark meat pieces in here that still have some meat on the bone. I will salvage this dark meat because our favorite thing to do with the leftover turkey meat is to make gumbo. And so I will make a video about that, and we'll share that with you in the coming days. But so all of this is down here. It's really super simple. Then I've been saving my veggie scraps. So I've just got some celery ends and some onion scraps. Now I do want to make a mention, especially when you're making broth, you do want to make sure even the ends and the scraps are washed, because especially if they come from the store, you don't know what's all on them. I don't always show us washing our veggies or our hands or our surfaces, but rest assured, we do that in the off screen. But if we showed every time we did all those things, these videos would be like 7 hours long. So we cut those things for y'all, but I know some people are concerned, but we do that. So we're gonna just layer in some of these veggie scraps, super duper simple. I also have leftover from garden season. I have kale stems, and you can just have whatever kind of veggies you want. These will make great broth. Again, there's no precise recipe. It's whatever leftover veggies you have laying around, and if you don't have leftover veggies, whatever veggies are in your fridge that are about to go bad. I'm gonna put some peppercorns in here because we'll strain this, some salt, and a couple of bay leaves. And again, you can season this to your taste. If you like thyme, if you like specific seasoning in your broth, go for it. I tend to shy away from really strong flavors in my broth because I use it in soups and things, and then once I'm making that soup, I can flavor the broth then however I want. But that's that easy. Now all I want to do is to cover it to where all of the things that are in this pot are covered with water. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the roasting pan because I don't want to carry this while it's got water in it. It gets heavy. I've got plugs right here on my island, which makes it really simple. And then all I'm going to do is to make sure that this is covered with water. So we'll pour in quite a bit of water to fill this 18-quart pan. Okay, everything is nice and covered, and now I'm gonna set my roaster to 250 degrees, and I'm gonna put a lid on it. If you're doing this on a stove, you can bring it to a boil and then simmer it down on low heat for 4 to 5 hours. We're gonna leave this going for 4 to 5 hours, and then at the end of that time, we will strain it and we'll pull off the broth. We're going to can our broth, but you can even just keep this in the fridge and it'll keep for a little while. So I'll see you back here in 4 to 5 hours when this is all done. Okay, so we have been cooking this broth for about 5 hours now, and I'm gonna go ahead and take this off. I turn this off. We're gonna open it up, and it smells delicious in here. I'm going to strain it into this pot first, and then I'm gonna pour it into my jars. So I have this little strainer, but I'm also gonna add some pieces of cheesecloth because some of the pieces are tiny. And as I'm doing this, since I left big pieces of meat in here and on the bones, I'm gonna go ahead and pull some of those off as we get them and put them in here because we're gonna use those for gumbo later. And you can check out that video, which we'll be posting tomorrow, or if you're watching this later, it's already up. So this is really a simple process. We're just gonna take the liquid and we're gonna scoop it up in a spoon and pour it through the sieve. And that kind of pulls out all of the things that need to be pulled out. Remember, we had veggie scraps, we had all sorts of stuff in here. So this is gonna make it just a nice clear liquid. And this is probably going to make quite a bit. This is an 18-quart roaster. I don't think there's quite 18 quarts of liquid because of all the solids that are in here. But there's gonna be quite a bit because it's filled really close to the top. This is gonna be wonderful broth for all the soups we can make this winter. All right, we're gonna do this in batches because I have a smaller pot than this. So I'm gonna do a little bit at a time. Now we're gonna go ahead and put it into these jars for canning. If you don't have a pressure canner, that is just fine. Your broth, you can freeze it or it'll last for 3 or 4 days in the fridge. But since we have a pressure canner, I'm gonna walk you through the process of pressure canning. So the first thing you wanna do is get your nice clean jar. And it really is this easy. We're just gonna pour the broth into the jar. I use a funnel to make it a little cleaner, but you don't even have to use a funnel. With broth, we want to leave an inch of headspace. Headspace is the distance between the top of the jar and the top of the canning liquid. So for us, right here in these jars, it's right at the bottom of this little lip, but you want to measure and know how far it is on your specific canning jars. All right, now we're going to take this and we're going to wipe the rim really good to make sure nothing is on the top of the rim that could come in the way of creating this nice good seal. And we're going to take the jar lid and tighten it finger tight and just a little twist more. You don't want to seal these jars too tight because if you do, in the canning process, the ring can cause the lid to come undone. So here we have our nice jar of broth. You can absolutely wait till these jars cool and skim the fat off the top. I don't do that, especially with turkey broth. There's not enough fat. It's not like beef broth where there's tons and tons. I usually do skim a little off the top with beef broth. But with turkey or chicken broth, I just leave it. It adds a little more flavor. Sometimes it can cause a seal to not seal properly. So you do want to check your seals, and as an extra precaution, if you want, you can even rub the ring before you put the lid on with vinegar, and that will dispel some of the fat. All right, so let's finish this whole process of canning these up. Okay, so it looks like I have 8 quarts out of that one turkey, and also this is probably enough to fill 2 more whole quarts, but this is what I'm saving out to use for our gumbo tonight. But you could just can it and put it away, or you can save it in the fridge. Now, if you're saving the broth in the fridge, don't stick it warm right in the fridge. It'll ruin some of the stuff in your fridge. Let it cool down to room temperature and then stick it in your fridge. So let's get to canning. And unfortunately my audio cut out here, but we are putting the broth into the pressure canner. We've got the trivet on the bottom so the jars aren't right up against the bottom, and we have a few inches of water. You don't want to submerge the jars, and we're setting these right in here. If you have hard water, a little vinegar goes a long way to cut that. You always want to make sure, especially with these canners, that you can see through the vent hole. And if you can't, you want to unclog it. And then one last thing to prepare your canner, you want to put some olive oil around the ring. On the All-American pressure canner, there's a little divot that matches up with an arrow. You match those up and you seal it up nice and tight. And then like lug nuts on a car, you want to do opposite sides and you want to tighten those. That way you don't get one end tilting up. And you tighten them a little bit, and then you go around and tighten the opposite ones on the other side and keep repeating that process, and then you can clamp them down pretty tight. Once you have this all ready to go, you put it on the stove over high heat, and then you wait until the vent starts venting steam. You want that to vent steam for 10 minutes before you put the weight on. You'll want to check the proper canning pressure for your altitude. For us, it is 10 psi. So we'll put the weight on at 10 psi, and then we want to wait until the weight starts jiggling. At that point, we want to regulate the temperature on the stove until the weight is jiggling 2 to 3 times per minute. Once that weight's jiggling, the timer can start. For this recipe, our quart jars need to process for 25 minutes. If you're using pint jars, they need to process for 20 minutes. Once 25 minutes is up, we're going to let this depressurize all the way down to 0 before we open the lid. And then we're gonna open the lid and let it set. Okay, our timer is now going off. It's been 25 minutes, which means we're now going to turn the heat all the way off. But we are going to leave everything else alone. We're not going to touch the weight or anything until the pressure on this dial gets down to 0. Once the pressure on the dial gets down to 0, we can then take the lid off. And we want to let the lid set off for at least 5 to 10 minutes before we take the jars out of here, so that there's not a rapid change in extreme temperature, and that can cause siphoning sometimes in the jars. So I'll see you back here for that. All right, now you can see we are down to 0 pressure, and we can take this weight off. And that can be hot, so be careful. You can use your gloves if you want, and we'll take the lid off. Now, one thing when you're taking the lid off, you want to make sure you always open the lid away from you so that if there's steam, it doesn't blow up in your face. All right, now we're going to set the timer for 10 minutes and we will come back when we're all ready to pull. All right, we've had the lid off of the canner for about 10 minutes. Now we're going to take the broth out and set it to cool. Look how beautiful that is. And there it is. We're gonna let it cool overnight, and in the morning we're gonna take the rings off and make sure it's sealed well. If they don't seal for some reason, you've got a little bit of time to get them in the fridge and use them. So we ended up with actually 10 whole quarts of turkey broth. Remember, 4 quarts I took out so we can make gumbo. This is a fantastic use for those old turkey carcasses that otherwise would just get thrown out. So thank you so much for joining us. And be sure to turn in tomorrow when we show you how to make gumbo with the leftover turkey.